Get out of here. You're making this whole neighborhood look bad. Look at you, driving around these streets in a car that probably isn't even yours. I'm cooperating with you. Be quiet. Her voice stayed calm. Whose car did you steal? Tell the truth. Put her in cuffs. Take her where she belongs. 4 white police officers forced a black woman down onto the hot Georgia pavement. Her belongings were thrown into the gutter, a knee pressed against her back, metal handcuffs tightened around her wrists. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She spoke softly, almost in a whisper. You're making a mistake you won't be able to take back. Sergeant Curtis Harlan's face turned red. He grabbed the back of her collar, pulled her head up, and struck her across the face hard enough for the sound to carry down the street. I told you to be quiet. No one was laughing for much longer, because the officers were about to learn exactly who the woman in handcuffs really was. Earlier, the evening sun hung low over Ridgecrest, Georgia. Golden light spilled through the oak trees lining Jefferson Avenue. Sprinklers hissed over freshly cut lawns. The air smelled of warm pavement and magnolia. Somewhere nearby a child bounced a basketball in a driveway, the steady rhythm echoing between the houses like a slow heartbeat. A dark blue rental sedan moved quietly through town. Behind the wheel sat Maren Dawson, 41 years old, wearing a cream blouse with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. A suitcase rested in the back seat. A garment bag hung from the passenger headrest, and through the opening in the zipper, navy blue fabric and gold buttons caught the fading light. On the passenger seat lay a thick manila folder filled with official paperwork. Her signed appointment letter was on top. Maren drove slowly, with the windows slightly open, taking in the city that was about to become her responsibility. She had been chosen to lead the Ridgecrest Police Department as its new chief of police. She would be the first black chief in the city's 140-year history and the first woman ever to hold the position. Mayor Helena Ward had personally appointed her after a nationwide search that drew more than 90 applicants. Maren had spent 18 years building toward this moment. She began as a patrol officer in Atlanta at 23. She became a detective by 28. By 32, she was working in internal affairs, the youngest investigator in her division's history. Later, she spent 3 years on a federal policing task force focused on corruption in departments across the Deep South. She had seen the worst side of law enforcement from the inside. Officers who lied in reports, supervisors who protected friends instead of the public, chiefs who looked away while people under their command suffered. Maren had helped hold those people accountable, quietly, methodically, by the book. No shortcuts, no private deals. Now Ridgecrest had called her. The previous chief had retired beneath a cloud of misconduct complaints and a racial profiling scandal that dominated state news for weeks. The city council voted unanimously that the department needed a clean start. They wanted someone from outside the old power structure, someone with no personal loyalty to the people who had allowed the problems to grow. Maren was that person. She passed the Ridgecrest Police Department, a low brick building with an American flag hanging almost still in the heavy evening air. She slowed and looked through the window toward the entrance. Her name had already been placed on the office door. She had seen a photograph sent by Deputy Chief Everett Cole. Gold lettering on frosted glass read Chief Maren Dawson. Everett had warned her during one of their calls. Not everyone here wants you, Maren. Some of these officers applied for the job themselves. They see you as an outsider. Some of them will call you a diversity hire. They'll test you before you even sit in that chair. Maren had smiled. Let them. Across town, Sergeant Curtis Harlan sat behind the wheel of his patrol cruiser outside a gas station on Route 9. The engine idled, while the air conditioning pushed stale air through the cabin. The inside smelled like old leather. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the dashboard beside a cup of cold coffee. Curtis had given 25 years to the Ridgecrest Police Department. 25 years of night shifts, intoxicated drivers, domestic calls, bar fights, traffic stops, and endless paperwork. I had applied for the chief's job. I believed the position belonged to him. I had the seniority. He had the rank. He had the years. And the city had chosen someone else. A black woman from outside the city. Someone who had never worked one shift on those streets. Someone Curtis had already decided had never earned anything there. Officer Brock Mercer sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone. He was younger, eager to impress, loud when Curtis was around, and had become the sergeant's shadow. In a second cruiser nearby, officers Wade Keller and Nolan Pierce waited with their windows down, passing the time. Curtis keyed his radio. "We're running enhanced patrols through Maplewood tonight. Keep your eyes open for anything that doesn't fit." Brock grinned. "Anything that doesn't fit, understood." Wade's voice came through the radio. "We'll keep the neighborhood safe, Sarge." I laughed when he said it. Nolan said nothing. A navigation reroute sent Marin through the Maplewood neighborhood because a water main problem had blocked her original route. She turned onto Maplewood Drive, where wide lawns stretched behind tall fences and porch lights were beginning to glow in the fading evening. She didn't notice the patrol cruiser at the far end of the street. Curtis noticed her immediately. Dark sedan, out-of-state plates, a black woman driving alone through Maplewood. Brock ran the plate. Rental car, Enterprise, picked up in Atlanta. Curtis put the cruiser in drive. "That's all I need to hear." Blue lights flashed behind Marin's car. She looked into the rearview mirror, drew one slow breath, and pulled to the curb. By the time Curtis reached her window, Marin's hands were already visible on the steering wheel. She had spent years standing on the other side of traffic stops, and she knew exactly how quickly an ordinary encounter could turn dangerous. She knew how one misunderstanding, one assumption, or one unnecessary movement could become permanent. Curtis didn't say good evening. He didn't introduce himself. He stood beside the window with one hand near his belt and the other holding a flashlight aimed directly into her eyes. The beam made it difficult to see his face. She could make out only his outline against the darkening sky, the brim of his hat, the bulk of his vest, and the shape of the weapon at his side. A dog barked somewhere down the street, then went quiet. "License and registration." "No, please. No, ma'am. No explanation." Just two flat words, delivered as though guilt had already been decided. Marin kept her voice even. "Of course, officer. My license is in my purse on the passenger seat. I'm going to reach for it slowly." "Just get it. I don't need the commentary." Marin moved carefully. She opened the purse with 2 fingers, removed her wallet, slid her license from its slot, and handed it through the window. Curtis snatched it without looking at her face. "Registration? It's a rental. The agreement is in the glove compartment. May I open it?" Curtis didn't answer. He leaned closer and looked past her into the car. Marin could smell stale coffee on his breath. His eyes moved from the suitcase to the garment bag, then to the manila folder. He studied each item as though he were assembling evidence for a conclusion he had reached before asking a single meaningful question. "Where are you coming from?" "Atlanta." "Where are you going?" "I have a rental home on Birch Street. I just arrived in town." "What's your business in Ridgecrest?" "I'm beginning a new position with the city." Curtis didn't ask what position. I didn't care. As far as he was concerned, the story was already complete. A black woman in a rental car with out-of-state plates, driving through one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in town. That was enough for him. I walked back to the cruiser, without another word. Brock followed, and threw Marin a crooked smile over his shoulder that made her stomach tighten. Marin remained in the driver's seat, with both hands on the wheel, breathing slowly through her nose. In the side mirror, she watched Curtis lean toward the cruiser computer. Brock said something. Curtis laughed. Brock pointed toward Marin's car and added something else. Curtis laughed again, harder this time. They were enjoying it. The sky darkened. A streetlight hummed to life nearby, spreading an orange circle over the sidewalk. Marin knew what Curtis was doing. He was running her name through every database available to him, the National Crime Information Center, state warrant records, county files, anything that might produce a flag or a reason to justify what he had already decided about her. She also knew what the computer would show. Nothing. Her record was spotless. She hadn't received so much as a parking ticket or speeding citation in 18 years. The search came back clean. Through the mirror, she saw Brock's posture change. He leaned back, looked at Curtis, and shrugged. No warrants, no prior record, no alerts. Marin Dawson was exactly what the facts said she was, a law-abiding citizen traveling on a public road. A reasonable officer would have walked back, handed over her license, and wished her a good evening. Curtis Harlan wasn't interested in being reasonable. He stepped out of his cruiser and walked toward Marin's car with a different posture. His shoulders were squared, his chest pushed forward, his steps heavier. It was the walk of a man who had made up his mind and didn't care what the computer said. He stopped at her window and tossed her license into her lap, as though it were trash. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." Marin's fingers tightened slightly around the steering wheel. "Can I ask why, officer?" "You can ask once you're on the sidewalk. My license came back clean. I haven't committed any violation. I'd like to understand why you're ordering me out." "Get out now, don't make me say it again." His right hand rested close to his holster. Behind the car, Brock's boots scraped against the pavement as he moved toward the passenger side. Wade had climbed out of the second cruiser and leaned against the hood with his arms folded, smiling as though he were watching a show. Nolan stood near the rear bumper with his hands buried in his pockets, staring at his own boots. 4 officers. 1 woman. A street growing darker around them. Marin understood the equation. She had spent years investigating use of force cases. She had read reports that ended with families sitting across from investigators asking why a routine stop had become irreversible. She knew that resistance, even polite resistance, could be rewritten later as aggression. She opened the door slowly and stepped out with her palms visible. "Turn around, hands on the trunk." She complied. The metal was still warm beneath her palms. She looked toward the houses, across the street. Porch lights glowed behind hedges. Curtains stayed closed. Shadows moved behind windows. A neighborhood could see the flashing lights. People could hear the voices. Most of them were choosing not to look. Brock moved close beside her. Marin could feel the heat coming from him. His flashlight swept over the back seat. "What's in the suitcase?" "Clothes and personal belongings." "What's in the hanging bag?" "Also clothing." Brock looked at Curtis across the roof. Curtis gave a short nod. Brock opened the rear door. "I do not consent to a search of my vehicle," Marin said clearly, making sure her voice could be heard by anyone nearby. Curtis moved behind her, his shadow falling across her back. "We've had reports of suspicious activity. Rental car, out-of-state plates, unfamiliar individual. That's reasonable suspicion." It wasn't. They both knew it. A rental car wasn't a crime. Out-of-state plates weren't a crime. Being unfamiliar wasn't a crime. Being black in a neighborhood where most residents were white wasn't a crime. But Curtis wasn't interested in the law at that moment. I was interested in control. Brock pulled the suitcase from the back seat and dropped it on the sidewalk. He crouched, unzipped it in the gutter, and began removing Marin's belongings, one by one. Blouses, pressed slacks, toiletries. He picked up a toiletry bag, squeezed it, shook it next to his ear, and tossed it aside. Then he held a silk scarf between 2 fingers. Fancy stuff for somebody in a rental. "Where'd you get the money for all this?" Wade called from beside the second cruiser. He had his phone raised and was recording with one hand. "Check under everything, man. That's where people hide things." He laughed. "I wasn't recording for official evidence. I was recording because he thought the video would entertain the other officers later." Nolan remained stiff near the rear bumper, with his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He watched Brock turn the suitcase upside down. Underwear fell onto the pavement. Socks scattered along the curb. A small frame photograph of Marin's mother slid out, struck the edge of the sidewalk, and cracked through the middle. Nolan stared at the broken frame. His jaw moved as if words were trying to come out. They didn't. Hein looked away. Across the street, partly hidden behind a parked minivan, a young black woman held her phone steady in both trembling hands. Her name was Tessa Monroe. She was 22 and visiting her grandmother. She had stepped outside to return a missed call when the flashing blue lights appeared at the end of the block. Now she was recording everything. Every word, every laugh, every movement. The small red recording indicator on her screen pulsed in the darkness. At the trunk, Marin heard her belongings hitting the pavement behind her. She heard Brock's boots crushing over clothing. She heard Wade's low laughter. Then she heard the slow, metallic sound of the garment bag zipper opening. Marin knew exactly what they were about to find. She also understood that by then, facts might not matter to these men. She closed her eyes, took one measured breath, let it out, and opened them again. Am I being detained, or am I free to go? Curtis walked around the car and stopped directly in front of her, blocking her view of everything else. His chest, badge, and stubbled jaw filled her line of sight. You're being detained until I say otherwise. This is my neighborhood, my jurisdiction, my call. He tapped his badge with one finger. I run these streets, not you, not anybody who looks like you. So keep your mouth shut until I decide what happens next. The sprinklers had gone quiet. The dog no longer barked. Even the usual sounds of the neighborhood seemed to disappear. All that remained was the low rumble of cruiser engines and the faint crackle of radio static. Maren stood completely still, hands flat against the warm metal, back straight, eyes forward. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pleading. She was memorizing badge numbers. Behind her, Brock opened the garment bag fully and pulled out what was hanging inside. A complete police dress uniform, navy blue, pressed perfectly, gold buttons running down the front, gold insignia on the shoulders, and 4 gold stars on the collar, the stars of a chief of police. On the breast pocket was a name badge bearing the name Dawson. Brock held the uniform beneath the streetlight and turned it from side to side. Then he looked at Curtis with his mouth half open, like someone who had discovered something he didn't understand. Curtis walked over, took the uniform from Brock's hands, and studied it beneath the orange glow. The stars caught the light. The fabric was immaculate. It had never been worn. For a moment, Curtis said nothing. Something flickered across his face. Maybe doubt. Maybe the first warning that the situation had moved beyond his control. Then the sneer returned. He raised the uniform higher, so Brock and Wade could see it. "Well, look at this. We've got somebody playing dress-up." He shook the uniform by the hanger. "Where'd you get this? A costume store? Did you steal it from somebody?" Brock burst out laughing. "She actually brought a costume." Wade aimed his phone more carefully. "Get the name tag. The guys at the station are going to love this." He zoomed in on the badge and saved the footage. Curtis carried the uniform back toward Maren and held it inches from her face. She could smell the fresh fabric, the dry cleaning chemicals, and the faint scent of the protective wrap it had been shipped in. "You want to explain this?" His voice had dropped lower, harder. He sounded like a man who believed he had caught someone lying. Maren looked at the uniform, then directly at Curtis. Her voice didn't shake. "That is my uniform. I was appointed Chief of the Ridgecrest Police Department. Contact Deputy Chief Everett Cole. He will confirm my identity." Curtis cut her off with a loud laugh. "Your uniform?" He repeated the words slowly. "Lady, I've been on this force for 25 years. I know every officer in this department. I know their spouses. I know their children. I've never seen you before, so don't stand here on my street and lie to me." He threw the uniform onto the ground. The hanger struck the curb. The navy fabric collapsed into the gutter. 1 gold star pressed into damp dirt. The nameplate Dawson faced upward toward the streetlight. Maren watched it fall. Her jaw tightened. A muscle moved in her cheek. But she kept her hands on the trunk and did not raise her voice. "Sergeant, I'm asking you respectfully to contact your watch commander or Deputy Chief Cole. It will take only a few minutes to verify who I am." Curtis stepped closer until his chest nearly touched her shoulder. His breathing was heavy. "I don't take orders from people like you," he said quietly. "Not now, not ever." He stepped back and gave Brock one short nod. No explanation was needed. Brock grabbed Maren's right wrist and twisted it behind her back. A sharp burst of pain shot from her wrist through her shoulder. She gasped. Before she could steady herself, he seized her left wrist and pulled it behind her as well. The handcuffs came out. Click, click, click. Each ratchet tightened against her skin. The cold metal bit into her wrists until she could feel her pulse beating against the steel. "You're being placed under arrest," Brock said close to her ear. "On what charge?" "Possession of stolen law enforcement property, impersonating a police officer, and resisting investigation." Maren hadn't resisted anything. She hadn't impersonated anyone. She hadn't stolen a thing in her life. But Curtis and Brock didn't need the accusations to be true in that moment. They only needed the charges to exist long enough to justify what they had already chosen to do. Curtis circled around until he stood in front of Maren. Then he leaned down until his face was level with hers. His eyes looked flat and empty. "For the last time, where did you get that uniform? Who are you really?" Maren's wrists burned. Her clothes were wrinkled and dirty from being pressed against the car, but her voice remained steady. "I already told you who I am. You're making a mistake that will follow you for the rest of your life." Something changed in Curtis's expression. His face darkened red. A vein stood out along his neck. His hand came up fast. Open palm, full swing. It struck the left side of Maren's face. The sound cracked across the street and bounced off brick mailboxes, windows, and the quiet homes lining Maplewood Drive. It hung in the warm night air like something that could never be taken back. Maren's head snapped to the right. Her body stumbled sideways, but the handcuffs held her arms behind her and made it difficult to recover her balance. Hot pain spread across her cheekbone and into her jaw. She tasted blood at the corner of her mouth. Everything became still. Brock froze. Wade lowered his phone. Even Curtis held his hand in the air for a moment, as though he had only just realized what he had done. Nolan, standing nearby, closed his eyes. His fists tightened at his sides. He said nothing. I did nothing. Then Wade lifted his phone again. Brock exhaled slowly. Curtis dropped his hand, rolled his shoulders, and looked down at Marin. I told you to keep your mouth shut. Maybe now you'll listen. Marin slowly turned her head back toward him. Her left cheek was red and beginning to swell. A thin line of blood rested at the corner of her mouth. She didn't wipe it away. She didn't cry. She didn't look down. She met Curtis Harlan's eyes and gave him the smallest smile, barely a curve at the edge of her mouth. But he saw it. That smile disturbed him more than tears or threats would have. It was the expression of someone who already understood how badly he had misjudged the situation. Before the traffic stop, Marin had sent Deputy Chief Everett Cole a brief message telling him she had arrived safely in town. When he didn't hear from her afterward, he sent another message. No response. He called her phone. Voicemail. He called again. Still nothing. A cold feeling settled in his chest. As a precaution, during her move to Ridgecrest, Marin had temporarily shared her location with him. Everett opened the location application and saw the same blue dot sitting motionless on Maplewood Drive. He grabbed his keys, clipped his badge to his belt, and walked to his unmarked vehicle without saying a word. I didn't call dispatch, he didn't radio patrol, and simply drove. When Everett turned onto Maplewood Drive, he saw the scene from down the block. 2 cruisers with lights flashing, a dark sedan at the curb, 4 officers standing around, 1 woman in handcuffs, a red mark visible across her face, and, in the gutter, scattered among clothing and personal belongings, lay the dress uniform of the incoming police chief. Navy blue fabric, gold stars. Crumpled in the dirt, Everett parked and stepped into the warm night air. Then he began walking toward them with the slow, deliberate pace of a man whose silence was already saying more than words could. Curtis noticed him first. He straightened immediately, adjusted his belt, and put on the formal voice he reserved for senior command. Deputy Chief, good evening, sir. What brings you out here? Everett didn't answer. I didn't slow down. I didn't even look at Curtis. He walked past him, past Brock, past Wade, past Nolan. He went straight to the woman standing beside the trunk with a swollen cheek, blood drying near her mouth and steel cuffs cutting into her wrists. Everett stopped in front of her. He looked at her face. He looked at the red mark across her cheekbone. He looked at the deep pressure marks forming beneath the cuffs. Then he glanced at the cracked photograph of Marin's mother, lying face down on the pavement. His jaw tightened. His hands slowly curled into fists. Then Everett Cole said 2 words, quietly, clearly, loud enough for every officer on the street to hear. Chief Dawson. The word chief struck the air like a sudden impact. Curtis's head snapped toward Everett. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Nothing came out. Brock stepped backward. The smirk that had been on his face disappeared instantly. Wade lowered his phone. His thumb froze over the screen. Nolan opened his eyes and released a long breath. Everett ignored all of them. He stepped forward, carefully took Marin's wrists and removed the handcuffs. The metal lifted away from her skin, leaving deep red grooves behind. Marin rubbed her wrists and rolled them gently as blood returned to her hands. Then she bent down and picked up her dress uniform from the gutter. She brushed dirt from the fabric with the back of her hand. She straightened the hanger. She wiped the nameplate with her thumb until the letters Dawson were clean again. Then she turned around. She faced the 4 men who, moments earlier, had acted as though they held all the power on that street. 4 men who had insulted her, dumped her belongings into the gutter, cuffed her, humiliated her, and allowed a handcuffed woman to be struck while she was unable to defend herself. The power dynamic had changed. Curtis tried to speak first. Listen, I didn't. We had no way of knowing. Sergeant Harlan. Marin's voice cut cleanly through the night. Not loud, not angry. Calm, controlled, final. The voice of someone who had earned every star on the collar, now resting in her hands. You will stop talking right now. Curtis's mouth closed. Marin stepped forward and faced all 4 officers. Sergeant Curtis Harlan, Officer Brock Mercer, Officer Wade Keller, Officer Nolan Pierce. She spoke each name slowly and clearly, as though reading it into an official record, because that was exactly what she intended to do. As of this moment, all 4 of you are suspended from duty without pay, pending a full internal affairs investigation. The allegations will include an unlawful traffic stop without probable cause, an illegal search and seizure in violation of the Fourth Amendment, assault on a civilian in custody, fabrication of criminal charges, and civil rights violations under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 242. She paused and allowed the words to settle. You will surrender your badges and service weapons to Deputy Chief Cole. Now. Nobody moved. Now. Brock moved first. His hands shook so badly that he struggled to unclip his badge. He missed the pin, tried again, pulled it free and handed it to Everett without making eye contact. Then he removed his service weapon, cleared it, and surrendered it as instructed. His face had turned pale. Wade went next. Badge into Everett's hand, weapon placed on the trunk. His phone remained in his other hand. He looked down at the video he had been recording, and something cold crossed his face. He slipped the phone into his pocket. I didn't know that Tessa Monroe was still across the street, behind the minivan, recording every second, from a wider angle, every word, every laugh, every movement. He also didn't know that his own phone had automatically backed up the recording to cloud storage. Deleting it from the device would change nothing. Nolan stepped forward without needing to be told again. Badge, weapon. He looked at Maren for a long moment. His eyes were red, his lips pressed tightly together. He opened his mouth as though he might apologize or try to explain why he had stood there and watched. No words came. He stepped back and looked at the ground. Curtis was last. He stood frozen in place, jaw moving from side to side. This is a misunderstanding, he finally said. His voice sounded rough and much smaller than before. I didn't know who you were, if I had known. That's exactly the point, Sergeant. Maren's voice was quiet now, almost gentle. That gentleness cut more deeply than shouting would have. You didn't know who I was. And because you didn't know, because all you saw was a black woman in a car, you decided I was nothing. You decided I deserved to be humiliated, searched, cuffed, and struck in the face on a public street. She lifted the dress uniform slightly. The gold stars caught the street light. What you did to me, you would have done to another black woman driving through this neighborhood. The difference is that this time you chose someone who has the authority to make sure your actions are fully investigated. Curtis removed his badge slowly, then his weapon. He stood beneath the same streetlight where he had struck a handcuffed woman, now without the symbols of authority he had used to intimidate her. Around the edges of the block, neighbors were beginning to gather. People stood on porches. A man watched from the end of his driveway. A teenager recorded from an upstairs window. The audience that had been quiet earlier was quiet no longer. Whispers moved through the street. Phone screens glowed in the darkness. Maren didn't address the crowd. She didn't need to. She stood with her dress uniform in one hand, her cheek red, dried blood still visible near her mouth, and allowed the image to speak for itself. The new chief of police was standing in the same place where those officers had tried to make her powerless. Maren didn't go home. She drove directly to the Ridgecrest Police Department, still wearing her cream blouse and dark slacks, still carrying the mark on her cheek, still with dried blood at the corner of her mouth. When she walked through the front doors, the night shift desk sergeant looked up from his screen and froze. Anya had never met her before, but the dress uniform draped over her arm with 4 gold stars gleaming on the collar made her identity clear. Chief Dawson. His voice came out half as a question and half as a whisper. That's correct. Get me a conference room, now. Maren convened an emergency meeting. Everett sat across from her with his jaw tight. The on-duty watch commander, Lieutenant Dana Bell, sat beside him, taking notes with a hand that wasn't completely steady. Maren described what had happened. No exaggeration, no emotional performance, just facts in order. The stop, the search, the uniform thrown into the gutter, the fabricated accusations, the handcuffs, the strike to her face. She recounted every detail in the same measured voice she had used on Maplewood Drive. It was the voice of a woman who had spent years building internal affairs cases and knew exactly what a prosecutor would need later. Then she issued her orders. All 4 officers were suspended without pay effective immediately. Access to their desks and lockers would be revoked. Their credentials would be deactivated. All dashboard camera and body camera footage from both cruisers would be preserved, downloaded, and sealed as evidence. She ordered the computer logs from Curtis's cruiser preserved as well, including the license plate search, database inquiries, and system records. I want everything documented, Maren said. Every second of footage, every radio transmission, every keystroke. I want a case file complete enough to stand on its own. Then she called Mayor Helena Ward personally. Maren summarized what had happened in a few direct sentences. There was a long silence on the other end. Then the mayor spoke quietly. Whatever you need. Chief Dawson, you have my full support, whatever it takes. Across town, the 4 suspended officers were reacting in 4 very different ways. Curtis sat in his truck outside a diner, with the engine running and both hands wrapped around the steering wheel. He stared through the windshield at nothing. He called his union representative. His voice was clipped, defensive, and tight. She had no department identification on her. I was doing my job. This is a setup. He repeated the word setup several times. I never mentioned striking Maren. Not once. Brock sat in his car in the police station parking lot with his forehead resting against the steering wheel. His phone lay dark on the passenger seat. Anne hadn't called anyone. Hein didn't know who to call. At 31 years old, he understood that one evening might have ended the career he had barely begun. The realization sat in his chest like a weight he couldn't move. Wade sat on the edge of his bed in his apartment, moving frantically through his phone with sweating fingers. Deleted the video from his camera roll. Then he deleted it from the recently deleted folder. He opened his cloud storage application and searched for the backup, and couldn't figure out where it was. He tapped, swiped, scrolled, and searched. Nothing worked. He didn't understand that the backup had been automatic and was already beyond his control. Nolan drove home in complete silence. No radio, no phone call. He pulled into his driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark. Eventually, he called Deputy Chief Everett Cole. His voice was low and unsteady. Deputy Chief, I should have said something. I should have stopped it. I watched the whole thing happen, and I didn't do anything. Everett was quiet before answering. Yes, you should have. Tessa Monroe uploaded her recording to several social media platforms with a simple caption explaining that Ridgecrest officers had handcuffed and struck their own incoming chief, a black woman. The recording lasted more than 4 minutes. It spread almost immediately. Hundreds of thousands of views, bitchy millions. The numbers climbed faster than anything Ridgecrest had ever experienced. National news organizations picked up the footage. Television anchors replayed the moment Curtis struck a handcuffed, motionless woman while other officers stood around her. The image entered the national conversation. Phrases such as Chief Dawson, Ridgecrest Police Department, Justice for Maren, and Fire Them All began trending across social platforms. In the center of that growing storm, Maren Dawson sat behind her new desk at the Ridgecrest Police Department, wearing her dress uniform for the first time. 4 gold stars caught the light from the office window. Her cheek was still swollen. She didn't cover it with makeup. She wanted people to see what had happened. Maren quickly removed herself from control of the investigation. She had to. She was the victim. And she understood better than anyone that no one should investigate their own assault. So she made a call Curtis Harlan never expected. She asked the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to take full control of the case. Agents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation arrived in Ridgecrest and established a workspace in a conference room inside City Hall, away from the police station and away from anyone who might still have loyalty to the department's old leadership. They brought evidence boxes, laptops, subpoenas. Then they started pulling at every thread. The dashboard camera footage from Curtis's cruiser showed the entire encounter. The traffic stop, his approach to the car, Maren's hands visible on the wheel, her calm voice answering questions, Curtis escalating the encounter despite finding no warrant or criminal history, Brock ordering her out. The search of the vehicle, the police uniform held up and mocked, the handcuffs, and then, in clear recorded detail, Curtis's open hand striking the left side of Maren Dawson's face. Body camera footage confirmed the same sequence from another angle. Brock's camera captured the sound of the strike so clearly that one of the investigators paused the recording and sat silently before continuing. Wade's phone video, the recording he believed he had deleted, was recovered from cloud storage by a digital forensics team. Every frame remained intact. The close view of the name badge, the laughter, his own voice talking about how the other officers at the station would enjoy watching it. Tessa Monroe's recording provided the wider view. It showed 4 officers surrounding one woman, her belongings scattered in the gutter. The strike the reaction afterward. A doorbell camera from a nearby house captured yet another angle that nobody involved had known existed. But the investigation didn't stop with Maplewood Drive. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation reviewed Curtis Harlan's patrol records going back 3 years. What investigators found was a pattern so consistent that it looked less like coincidence and more like routine practice. Over a 24-month period, Curtis's unit had conducted 61 traffic stops in the Maplewood neighborhood. 53 of those stops involved Black or Latino drivers. None of those 53 stops resulted in an arrest based on actual criminal activity. Not one. Every case ended with release, or with a person leaving after an unnecessary and humiliating encounter. Internal complaints had been filed before. 7 of them, all 7, had been reviewed by the previous chief. All 7 had been dismissed with the same short notation: unfounded, closed. The pattern was now documented in a way that could not easily be ignored. Mayor Helena Ward later held a press conference on the steps of Ridgecrest City Hall. The Georgia heat pressed heavily over the crowd. Reporters from multiple states filled the sidewalk. Cameras lined the curb. Murren stood beside the mayor wearing her full-dress uniform, the same uniform Curtis had thrown into a gutter, the same gold stars that had been pressed into the dirt. Now, the uniform had been cleaned, pressed and worn with the posture of a woman who had earned every thread of it. The mayor spoke first. She announced that criminal charges had been referred to the district attorney's office. She said the city would conduct a full review of the police department's use of force policies, traffic stop procedures, and internal complaint process. She also announced the creation of a civilian oversight board, the first in Ridgecrest history. Then Maren stepped to the microphone. She didn't speak for long. She didn't need to. What happened to me on Maplewood Drive happens to black and brown people in this country far too often, she said. Most of the time there is no badge reveal. There is no sudden reversal. There is only the humiliation, the fear and the silence that comes afterward. She looked toward the cameras. As chief of this department, I intend to build something different. A department where people don't have to fear the badge. A department where the badge means protection for everyone, not only for some. Her statement was broadcast nationally and shared millions of times. When the criminal case reached trial, Sergeant Curtis Harlan faced charges including second-degree assault, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, official misconduct, and filing a false report. Officer Brock Mercer faced charges related to unlawful detention, civil rights violations, and acting as an accessory to the assault. Officer Wade Keller faced civil rights charges, official misconduct, and evidence tampering. His attempt to delete the phone recording resulted in an additional felony allegation. Officer Nolan Pierce faced charges for failing to intervene and dereliction of duty. The prosecution called 14 witnesses. The defense called 3. One of the most important moments came when prosecutors played Tessa Monroe's recording for the jury. The courtroom became silent. 12 jurors watched a handcuffed woman being struck across the face on a suburban street while 4 officers stood around her. 2 jurors looked away. 1 covered her mouth. The 4-woman closed her eyes and didn't open them until the recording ended. Curtis's defense argued that he had no way of knowing Maren's identity. They claimed the stop had been conducted in good faith and that the encounter had escalated because of miscommunication. The prosecution answered with 4 simple words. That's exactly the point. The jury found all 4 officers guilty on the major counts they faced. At sentencing, Curtis Harlan received 8 years in federal prison. Brock Mercer received 5 years. Wade Keller received 6 years, with an additional 18 months connected to the evidence tampering count. Nolan Pierce, who had cooperated fully with investigators and testified against the other 3 officers, received 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and permanent termination from law enforcement. When the sentences were read, Curtis stared straight ahead. His jaw was locked. His hands rested flat on the table. I didn't look at Maren. I didn't look at anyone. Brock lowered his head and cried. Wade's attorney filed an appeal, but it was later denied. Nolan stood, turned toward Maren, and gave one small nod. Maren nodded back. It was the closest thing to an apology they would ever exchange. The Ridgecrest Police Department then began a transformation that many people in town had never believed they would see. Maren required de-escalation training for every officer. Body cameras became mandatory on every shift, and footage was reviewed regularly by the new Civilian Oversight Board. Hiring practices were overhauled, The department began recruiting through historically black colleges and universities, along with community organizations across Georgia. Within 12 months, civilian complaints fell by 60%. User force incidents dropped by nearly half. Community trust surveys showed measurable improvement for the first time in a decade. National media began covering Maren Dawson not simply as a victim, but as a reformer. Not because of what had been done to her, but because of what she chose to do with what happened. She took one of the worst experiences of her life and turned it into the first page of something new. Later, Maren drove down Maplewood Drive again. The evening sun sat low over the oak trees, painting the neighborhood in warm gold. Sprinklers hissed across the lawns. A child rode a bicycle in slow circles at the edge of a driveway. The air carried the scent of fresh grass and warm pavement. Maren drove slowly with the windows down. No sirens behind her, no flashing lights, only the quiet hum of the car and the sound of cicadas waking in the evening. She passed the exact place where the traffic stop had happened. She knew it without needing a marker. Between the brick mailbox and the third oak tree. The place where her knees had touched the hot pavement. Where her mother's photograph had cracked against the curb. Where Curtis Harlan had struck her while 3 other officers stood by, and an entire neighborhood struggled with whether to look away. There was nothing there now. No sign, no memorial. Just a sidewalk, concrete, grass, and porch lights beginning to glow. But Maren remembered. She would always remember. The heat beneath her palms, the bite of the handcuffs, the taste of blood, the laughter of men who believed their badges made them untouchable. She kept driving. She pulled into the police station parking lot and walked through the front doors. "Good evening, Chief." "Evening, Corporal." The building looked different. Community outreach posters had replaced some of the old notices on the walls. A bulletin board displayed photographs from a weekend mentorship program. Officers were shown playing basketball with local children and handing out backpacks during a school supply drive. Small things, real things. Halfway down the hallway, a young officer stepped out of the break room and nearly bumped into Maren. She was a black woman in her early 20s, wearing a fresh uniform. Her badge was still new enough to catch the overhead light. "Chief Dawson, I'm sorry, I didn't see you." Maren smiled. "You're fine." "Officer Jada Reeves, ma'am. I recently joined the department." "I know, I signed your paperwork." Maren paused. "How are you settling in?" Jada stood a little straighter. Her eyes were bright, nervous, proud. "But good, ma'am, really good. I wanted to tell you that you're the reason I applied. I saw your press conference, and I thought, if she can walk back into this building after what happened to her, maybe I can walk into it too." Maren looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't apply because of me, Officer Reeves. You applied because of you. I just made sure the door was open." Jada smiled and walked back toward the break room with her shoulders a little higher than before. Maren watched her go. Then she entered her office and sat behind the desk. Same desk, same 4 gold stars. She opened a drawer and took out a framed photograph of her mother. It was the same photograph that had cracked against the curb on Maplewood Drive. New glass, new frame, same picture, same warm eyes. Maren placed it on the corner of her desk where she could see it every day. And that is what this story leaves behind. Have you ever watched someone being treated unfairly because of how they looked, where they came from, what they wore, or what someone assumed about them? In moments like that, it's easy to believe that staying quiet keeps us safe. Sometimes silence feels easier. Sometimes we tell ourselves that someone else will step forward. But choices have consequences, even the quiet ones. Curtis chose to let prejudice guide his authority. Brock chose to follow. Wade chose to turn humiliation into entertainment. Nolan knew something was wrong and chose not to act until it was too late to prevent the harm. Tessa, standing across the street with shaking hands, made a different choice. She recorded what she saw. Everett trusted his concern and went looking for Maren. And Maren, even after being humiliated, chose accountability instead of revenge. That difference matters. Real power isn't a badge, a title, a uniform, or 4 gold stars on a collar. Power is what person chooses to do when someone else is vulnerable. It can be used to frighten, dismiss, and control, or it can be used to protect, listen, and make room for others. Maren couldn't erase what happened on Maplewood Drive. Accountability couldn't make the strike disappear. A guilty verdict couldn't remove the memory of handcuffs cutting into her wrists or restore the moment before her mother's photograph hit the curb. But she could decide what came next. She could build better policies. She could open the department to civilian oversight. She could make training more serious. She could create opportunities for officers like Jada Reeves. She could turn pain into responsibility instead of allowing pain to harden into bitterness. There is also a lesson in Nolan's silence. Most people will never stand in a scene exactly like the one on Maplewood Drive, but many of us will face smaller moments when we know something isn't right. A cruel joke, an unfair assumption, someone being dismissed because of appearance, a colleague being treated differently because they seem unfamiliar or out of place. We may not always know the perfect words. We may be afraid of making the situation worse, but doing nothing is still a choice. Kindness doesn't mean avoiding accountability. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending harm never happened. Compassion doesn't require ignoring consequences. Sometimes the most humane thing we can do is tell the truth clearly, accept responsibility, and change the conditions that allowed harm to happen in the first place. Maren kept her dignity because she refused to let another person's behavior decide who she would become. She stayed calm, but she wasn't passive. She followed the law, but she didn't surrender her voice. And when she finally had the power to respond, she used that power to protect people who might never have the authority she had. That's the kind of strength that lasts. If this story moved you, think about the moments in your own life when you had a choice to look away or to pay attention. Think about the person who might have needed one witness, one calm voice, one open door, or one person willing to say, "This isn't right." Share your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with someone who may need to hear it. And if you want more stories about justice, courage, accountability, and people who refuse to stay down, subscribe and stay with us. Because dignity isn't something a stranger gets to hand you or take away. It lives in the way you carry yourself, the way you treat people when you have power, and the choices you make when no one is forcing you to do the right thing. Stay calm, stay aware, stay human.